Welcome to episode 6 of the Boys to Men podcast. Very excited for today's episode as we're going to be talking about the idea of self-care, and how this perceived image of ourself has never been more fragile than it is now. Now, before we get into today's episode, I just want to make a request that if you've enjoyed these episodes, again, you share it with just one person. And two, if you would like for me to discuss a specific topic or have a specific guest on, I am open to that feedback. Always willing to listen to any recommendations, and would love to make that happen moving forward. Now, getting into today's episode, I started thinking about this topic about 2.5 weeks ago when I listened to a podcast by the School of Greatness, Lewis Howes, and he had a guest on there who talked about the fact that we live in an identity economy. So what an identity economy, simply put, is if economic prices are the same, then we are going to choose the item or service that we most connect with, that we see ourselves in, values that we connect with, et cetera, et cetera. Makes sense. The problem is also that we are now starting to have a whole ecosystem, a whole structure, a whole industry around self-care and self-help. And this is good-ish. And why I add in that ish is because if we are constantly searching in pursuit of self and thinking that we need to have everything together as far as happiness goes, as far as maintenance of our emotions goes, as far as, just essentially having everything together as an individual, that's not how we function as humans. We have never functioned that way. No society that measures happiness and success can get by with just being alone. And so it started to get me thinking about trends. I've been really interested in trends the last couple of years. And one of those trends is the fact that everything is being automated. And I'm not going to go off into some conspiracy theory about how the government is trying to do X, Y, and Z. That's not what this podcast is about. But everything is now at our disposal. And this is all relatively new. This is an advancement that we've just now recently, witnessed and been a part of. Now we can order our groceries. We don't even have to go to the grocery store. We can order our favorite coffee through Uber Eats. We don't ever have to leave our homes. Or if we do, it's on very rare occasions. We can have everything at our disposal like that. And so this industry of self-care and self-esteem and self-awareness is buying into this automation as well. You don't even need to go to therapy at a doctor's office now. Now you could just download an app and you can talk to a bot. You don't need to go out and feel the uncomfortable nature of approaching a pretty girl and saying, hey, so I was wondering if I could take you on a date, or are you seeing anybody at the moment? We aren't having to learn those skills. Now we could just download an app, swipe away. Easy as that. And I think about the trends of where that's leading us to. What is that teaching our children? And even, I don't even know if teaching is the right word there. What is that setting them up for? Because I don't believe that we are intentionally trying to ruin the next generation. But when you look around at restaurants, you see kids on their phones, on their tablets, not interacting with the family. We're not learning how to be bored, especially children. If they start to fuss even a little bit, it's, give them the phone, give them the tablet, and they'll be able to entertain themselves. And when you think about what that's programming the brain to do, is that the second you get bored, you need a dopamine hit. And that dopamine hit comes from technology. So it's becoming dependent on technology while simultaneously becoming less dependent on community. A second point that I wanted to touch on is the fact that the rise in astrology. Now, I'm not going to bash astrology. I don't think it's rooted in science. I don't think it's very practical, but I am curious about the rise of astrology in and of itself and the simultaneous decrease in wanting to be connected to a religious institution. And I think that correlation isn't. I think there's a causation there. I don't think it's a correlation by chance. And the reason I believe that is because we all need something to root ourselves, to anchor ourselves. Again, the self has never been more fragile. So when you don't have something that you can turn back to, well, then what do? Well, then you turn to astrology. Well, then you turn to something that'll be able to feed into our perhaps mood changes and anxiety and you know, switches in behavior, and we can blame it on the stars and alignment instead of taking accountability and be able to lean back on our community. And there was a really good commencement speech by David Foster Wallace. It's called This Is Water. And in this speech, he talks about how you need to worship something and you need to be intentional about worshiping something. And the reason why he says you need to is because we already worship things. We, by default, as humans, we worship. That's why every single country has some form of religion, whether it's monotheism or whether you believe in many gods, whatever it is, we all believe in worshiping something. And the people who reject religion, reject a god or a deity, those are often the people who end up worshiping attributes of other humans or themselves. So if you worship your own beauty, you are never going to feel worthy physically. If you worship your intellect, you will never feel smart enough. If you worship your youth, you are going to regret getting older and you're going to fear death. And so all of that to say, this idea of self-care and this idea of thinking that we can do everything by ourselves and technology is going to solve all these issues is really concerning to me. And it's scary to think about what we're setting up, not only for the next generation, but the current generation that we're already living in. It's really easy to discern the problems and the negative outcomes that we have done in the past. It's really easy to look back and say, ooh, that was a mistake. Yeah, maybe shouldn't have been in that relationship, or I don't think that I handled that business meeting in the best way that I could, or yeah, that job wasn't right for me. It's really easy to do that after the fact. It's much more difficult to do it while you're in the middle of it. And what I fear is that we are currently in the middle of a reprogramming where all of us are just slaves to our social media devices, and we just have everything so easy at our disposal that it doesn't even force us to make genuine human connection. And there's a reason why anxiety is going up and depression is going up, and why so many kids compare themselves to others. Social media, I listened to another podcast with, I think his name is Cal Newport. He's a computer scientist, I believe, for Berkeley, I want to say, but I could be messing that up. And he talked about how social media in its first inception, as Steve Jobs first thought about the iPhone, he wanted everything that was practical for a happy life. He just wanted people to enjoy themselves, and that was it. He wanted the most practical aspect. He wanted music, he wanted connection, and he wanted you to get the best in one device, but nothing less. He was very minimal in his approach. And Facebook even started out that way. It was, your relationship status, and it was updating people. What changed social media and subsequently started changing our brains and the way we are wired was the addition of the likes and the comments. Because the addition of the likes and the comments then forced us, or maybe not forced us, but then enabled us to constantly want to check for social approval and say, oh, okay, I just posted this picture. Is it getting enough likes? Is it getting enough comments? Are people sharing it enough? And I'm guilty of this too. This isn't a critique about everybody else and I'm sitting over here on my high horse. I'm 100% guilty of this. And that's really problematic, really problematic. And so when we don't have something to anchor ourselves in, again, I'm not saying you have to be Christian or Muslim or whatever, but when you don't have something to anchor yourself and you are becoming increasingly dependent on technology and your idea of self has never been more fragile, this looks like a recipe for disaster. And so a potential antidote to all of this, as Kyle said, is delete your social media for a month. Get out of the house and connect with your friends. There's, the whole traditional hanging out with your mom and dad and going out into nature it works. It really does work. It makes you just happier. There's nothing like connecting with a great friend or connecting with your partner in the real world sense. The part of our brain that inputs information from another human is different than the part of our brain that inputs information from technology or not from a real life conversation. And there's a reason for that. Again, as with all of this amazing evolution and technology, we still have very old brains, and our brains need community. We need to be able to rely on one another. And so when you are talking about self-care and wanting to improve self, these are great and noble causes. It's wonderful. You want to improve your life? Amazing. Me too. Most of us do. That's awesome. But don't forget that you need a community to support you. You need real people there for you. You need a real structure in your life, whatever that structure is. Again, whether it's a religious institution, whether it's stoicism, whatever it is, we need that structure. So I encourage you, to think about these things. And I hope that if you're in your self-care journey and you've been shutting people out, that you crack open that door just a little bit and allow room and space for somebody to walk through. So that is episode 6. Self-care should not be a solo journey. As always, my only payment for this podcast is that you share it with just one person and start with yourself and then try to help others. Take care.